The marketplace smelled of oil, rust, and fear. Under the red light of a dying sun, cages lined the street. Inside them were beings from a dozen worlds, some silent, some crying, some staring at the ground. And among them stood a young alien girl with silver eyes, her small hands gripping the metal bars. Evan had come to this outpost to sell old ship parts. He never liked this place. It was where lost people came to forget who they were. He walked fast, eyes low, hoping to finish his deal and leave. But when he heard the whip crack and a soft cry, he stopped. A group of traders laughed near the cages. One of them pulled the silver-eyed girl by the arm, showing her off like a broken toy. "Strong lungs, light bones, and rare skin color," the man shouted. "Half price if sold today." The crowd cheered. Evan felt something twist inside him. He had seen many bad things in the galaxy, but something about that girl's eyes froze him. They were not the eyes of a slave. They were the eyes of someone trying not to break. For a moment, the world around him faded, the noise, the smell, the crowd, and only that girl remained. The trader saw him watching and smiled. "Interested, human? She's cheap. Good worker. Won't talk much." Evan shook his head. "I'm not here for this," he said, turning away. But as he walked, her soft voice reached him. "Please, don't leave me here," he stopped. The words were weak, almost broken, but they cut deeper than any blade. He turned again. The trader was now dragging her toward a ship.
The crowd laughed.
"Back to the mines with her," someone shouted. Evan's heart pounded. He knew he shouldn't get involved. Slavers were protected here. Saving one would make him an enemy of many. He had no weapon, no allies. Just an old ship and a half-empty wallet. He clenched his fists. He could walk away and live. Or he could act and die trying. He moved forward. "How much?" he asked. The trader laughed. "For her? Too much for a poor scrap dealer like you." Evan opened his pack and threw it down. Inside were metal parts, food rations, and his navigation chip, the only thing that could get him back to Earth. "All of it," he said. The trader's grin faded. The crowd went quiet. "You're crazy," the man said. "Maybe," Evan replied. "But I'm buying her." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the trader shrugged. "Fine, a deal's a deal." He unlocked the cage, shoving the girl out. She stumbled, and Evan caught her before she fell. Her skin was cold, and her silver eyes looked up at him with disbelief. "You're free now," he whispered. Blaster fire cracked in the distance. The other slavers had noticed. "Stop that human," someone shouted. Evan grabbed the girl's hand and ran. They raced through narrow alleys, past broken machines and piles of trash. The air burned with smoke and screams. Behind them, footsteps followed. Evan pushed open a steel door and pulled her inside. It was his ship, a small, rusty cargo vessel named the Sparrow. "Hold on!" he shouted as he started the engine. The thrusters roared, shaking dust off the floor. A shot hit the side of the hull, but the ship lifted anyway, climbing into the red sky. Through the window, they saw the slavers fading behind them, their ships too slow to follow. Evan leaned back, breathing hard. The girl sat silently beside him, clutching the torn edge of her cloak. "Do you have a name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said softly, "Lyra." Evan smiled tiredly. "Well, Lyra, welcome aboard." For the first time, she smiled too, a small, trembling smile that made his chest ache. The stars opened before them, endless and cold. He didn't know where they were going or what would happen next. But for now, she was safe, and that was enough. As the ship drifted into deep space, Evan looked at her reflection in the window. The girl who had been a slave was now free, and deep inside him, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something far greater. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the engines, destiny had just changed its course. The stars outside the ship shimmered like quiet fires. Evan sat in the pilot's seat, his hands trembling slightly as he guided the Sparrow through deep space. Beside him, Lyra watched everything with wide, curious eyes. She had never seen the stars like this, free, open, endless. For hours, neither spoke. Only the sound of the old ship's engines filled the silence. Finally, Evan broke it. "Do you know where your people are?" he asked gently. Lyra shook her head. "They took me from my home when I was little. I don't remember where it is." Her voice was soft, but every word carried pain. Evan nodded slowly. "Then we'll find a safe place first." He searched through old star charts and found a forgotten mining moon called Varan 6, a a place no one visited anymore. The air was thin but breathable, and the scanners showed no life signs, no traders, no pirates, no patrols. Perfect for hiding. After landing, they stepped out into the pale light of the moon. The ground was gray and dusty, the sky dim. Broken machines lay half buried in the soil, old mining towers quiet and empty. To Lyra it looked dead, but to Evan it meant peace. He built a small shelter beside a half-collapsed metal hangar. It wasn't much, just walls of scrap and a roof patched with steel sheets, but it kept them safe from the freezing nights. He showed Lyra how to build a fire using power cells, how to cook dried food, and how to fix the small robot helpers that still worked. Days turned into weeks. Lyra learned quickly. She followed Evan everywhere, asking questions about humans, machines, and the stars. She laughed when he tried to teach her Earth phrases, and he smiled when she tried to fix broken circuits better than him. Slowly, the silence of the moon began to feel alive again. At night, she would sit outside, staring at the stars. Evan often joined her. "Why did you save me?" she asked one evening, her voice barely a whisper. Evan looked at the sky, his face hidden in the dim light. "Because no one else would," she nodded quietly, thinking about those words long after he had gone to sleep. But peace never lasts long in the galaxy. One morning, while Evan repaired the ship's old power core, he noticed strange marks on the ground, deep burns, fresh ones. Someone had landed nearby. His heart tightened. He scanned the horizon and a chill ran down his spine. 3 distant shapes were moving toward their camp. He rushed to Lyra. "Inside, now!" he said. She obeyed without question, running into the shelter. Through the cracked window they saw the figures, 3 men in dark armor carrying pulse rifles. Slave hunters. Evan grabbed his blaster, an old weapon from his military days, and checked the charge. "They tracked you," he said. Lyra's hands shook. "I'm sorry. They always find me." He looked at her and forced a small smile. "Then let's make sure they don't take you again." The hunters reached the door, scanning the area. One kicked it open. The first shot came fast, a flash of blue light. Evan rolled aside, firing back. The blast hit one man square in the chest. Sparks flew as another threw a grenade that exploded near the wall, sending metal flying. Lyra screamed as debris fell. But then something strange happened. The air shimmered around her. The falling pieces slowed as if time itself hesitated. A glowing field of light surrounded her hands. Evan stared in disbelief. "Lyra, what are you doing?" "I don't know," she cried. But her eyes were glowing bright silver now. The air pulsed once, and the remaining 2 hunters were thrown backward by an invisible wave. Their weapons melted. The silence that followed was heavy and unreal. When the light faded, Lyra fell to her knees, shaking. Evan caught her before she hit the floor. "Easy," he said softly. "You're okay." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "They won't stop. They'll come again. I'm different, Evan. They said my blood is royal. That's why they want me." Evan's jaw tightened. "Then we're leaving this rock. Tonight." He helped her onto the ship, leaving everything behind. As the Sparrow lifted off, flames from the destroyed camp glowed below them. Evan set a new course, away from known systems, deeper into the stars. Lyra sat beside him, exhausted but alive. She reached out and took his hand. "You should have left me," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Not a chance." Outside, the stars stretched endlessly. And somewhere far behind them, the slave traders would find nothing but ashes. Evan didn't know it yet, but the girl beside him wasn't just another rescued child. She was the last heir of a fallen empire, and one day the stars themselves would remember this flight, the night a human and an alien girl disappeared into the void, beginning a legend that would change everything. The Sparrow drifted through the void, its engines whispering against the silence of space. Evan sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the cracked display. The ship was old, its systems failing one by one, but it was all they had. Behind him, Lyra sat wrapped in a thin blanket, her silver eyes dim with exhaustion. For 3 days they had been running. No signals, no stops, no sleep. Every few hours the radar blinked with movement. Unidentified ships chasing them from system to system. Whoever those hunters were, they had powerful allies. Evan leaned forward, checking the nav map. "We can't keep running like this," he muttered. The Sparrow wasn't built for war. Lyra stood slowly, her legs weak but steady. "Where are we going now?" "Anywhere they can't follow." He smiled tiredly. "That narrows it down to nowhere. She tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. You should have left me on the moon. They're after me, not you. He looked at her, eyes sharp. And if I did that, I wouldn't be human anymore. For a moment, silence filled the cabin. The stars outside glowed blue as they passed through a nebula. The ship's lights flickered. Evan could hear the metal groaning like a tired beast. Suddenly, the alarm blared. 3 enemy ships had locked on their trail. Red lights flashed across the dashboard. Strap in, Evan shouted. The Sparrow jolted forward as laser fire tore through the black sky. Evan jerked the controls, dodging beams that burned past the hull. Sparks flew from the panels. One of the rear engines exploded, sending the ship spinning. Lyra screamed as the cabin tilted sideways. Evan fought the controls with both hands. Come on, hold together, he shouted. His voice mixed with the ship's creaks and the roar of enemy fire. A blast hit the right wing, cutting through the metal like paper. The warning lights turned crimson. Oxygen leak detected. Evan's vision blurred from the smoke. He turned toward Lyra. Get to the emergency hatch. But she didn't move. Her silver eyes glowed faintly again. The air around her shimmered like heat waves. Evan froze. The ship's walls vibrated, and the light around her hands grew brighter. Outside the window, one of the enemy ships suddenly veered off course. Its own weapons turned and fired back at its allies. The explosion painted the stars white. Lyra gasped and fell to her knees, trembling. The light faded. Evan rushed to her. Lyra! What did you just do? I don't know, she whispered. It just happened when I got scared. Evan looked out the window. 2 ships remained, still approaching. He grabbed a wrench and crawled under the console, his mind racing. If we can't fight them, we'll have to outrun them. But we're out of fuel, she cried. He smiled through the soot on his face. Then we steal time instead. He pulled open a side panel and began rewiring the main reactor. It was dangerous. One wrong move and the ship would explode. But it could give them one last jump. Sparks burned his hands, smoke filled the air, and his vision darkened, but he kept working. Evan, stop, Lyra shouted, tears in her eyes. You'll die! He didn't answer. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the reactor roared back to life. The Sparrow shot forward faster than it had ever gone. The stars blurred into streaks of white. Evan fell back in his seat, chest heaving. We made it, he whispered before passing out. Lyra crawled to him, shaking his shoulders. Evan, wake up! But he didn't respond. His arm was badly burned, the skin scorched from the reactor's heat. She dragged him to the medical bunk and wrapped his wound using strips of cloth. Then she sat beside him, whispering softly, You saved me again, even when you didn't have to. For the next few hours, she piloted the ship as best she could, following the stars. The radar was empty now. No pursuers, only silence. She stared out the window at the endless night. Her reflection looked older, stronger. Deep inside, memories flickered, of palaces, voices, and a symbol she once wore around her neck. The mark of her people, the royal crest, tears welled in her eyes. You don't know who I am, Evan, she whispered. But one day, I'll make sure the whole galaxy knows who you are. The ship floated on, its engines weak but steady. Evan slept, breathing shallow but alive. The girl who had been a slave now guarded the man who had freed her. Outside, a comet passed quietly, its trail glowing like fire across the black. It was as if the universe itself bowed in silence for the man who had risked everything for a stranger, and the alien girl whose destiny had just begun to awaken. The years rolled by like silent waves across an endless sea of stars. Evan never spoke much about the day he lost his arm. He built a metal one later, rough and simple, made from scavenged ship parts. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. After that, he stopped traveling between systems. He had seen too much, lost too much. So he settled down on the quiet edges of Earth, far from the busy cities and the endless noise of galactic trade routes. He opened a small workshop near the ocean, fixing old hoverbikes and fishing drones for local workers. People called him Old Evan now. His beard was gray, his eyes tired but kind. Children sometimes came to watch him work, asking about his stories of space, but he always smiled and said, Just old tales, kid. Nothing worth remembering. But every night, when the sky turned dark and stars began to shine, he walked outside and looked up. His gaze always found the brightest star in the northern sky, the one that reminded him of her, Lyra. He didn't know where she was now. After that final escape, she had stayed with him for a few months before leaving. She said she needed to find her people, to learn who she really was. She had promised to come back. And he had believed her. That was 20 years ago now. Only silence answered when he called her name in his dreams. Sometimes, rumors floated through the trade networks about an alien queen who ruled with justice and fire, freeing planets once held by slave empires. No one knew her name. No one had ever seen her face clearly. Evan never asked questions. But deep in his heart, he hoped. One evening, a storm hit the coast. Rain pounded against the roof as Evan worked on a broken drone. Lightning flashed through the window. Suddenly, his power tools went dead, the entire grid shut down. He sighed and reached for his lantern. Then he felt it. A low hum in the air, soft but deep, vibrating through the walls. The sound wasn't from the storm. It was too even, too controlled. He stepped outside, squinting through the rain. The clouds above the ocean glowed faintly gold. He thought it was lightning again until the clouds began to move against the wind. Slowly, a massive shape emerged from the storm. It wasn't a cloud. It was a ship, not like any he had seen before. Smooth, glowing with shifting light, silent as breath. It hovered above the waves, casting golden reflections over the water. The storm itself seemed to bow beneath it. Evan froze. His tools fell from his hand. He whispered to himself, "No, it can't be." A smaller craft detached from the ship and descended toward the beach. The sand blew outward as it landed, sleek and shining. The door opened and 3 figures stepped out. Tall, armored beings with faces hidden behind silver masks. They moved with grace but not hostility. The one in the center removed her helmet. Her silver eyes caught the lightning. Evan's breath stopped. His voice trembled. "Lyra?" She smiled, the same small trembling smile from long ago. But now her face was older, stronger, a queen's face. Her long white hair shimmered in the rain, and the mark on her forehead glowed faintly. A royal sigil, ancient and powerful. She walked toward him, her steps slow, the water swirling around her boots. The guards behind her stayed still, their heads bowed. "I told you I'd come back," she said softly. Her voice carried both warmth and command, the voice of someone who had led armies. Evan stared at her, unable to speak. "You—" He looked at her armor, her ship, her people. "You did all this?" Lyra nodded. "You saved me from chains. You gave me freedom. I used that freedom to break the chains of others." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her eyes. "They called me queen," she said. "But I never forgot the man who showed me mercy when no one else would." Evan's throat tightened. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You were just a scared kid when I found you." Lyra stepped closer. "And you were just a broken man who believed kindness could still exist." "You were right." For a long moment they stood in the rain, the storm roaring around them, neither speaking. The world felt small again, just like that first day in the slave market, the moment that had changed both their lives. Then Lyra turned to her guards and gave a quiet command in her language. The largest of them knelt and opened a small case. Inside lay a golden crest shaped like a crown. Lyra took it in her hands and looked back at Evan. "I didn't come to repay you," she said. "I came to keep a promise." Evan looked at the crown, confused. "Promise?" She smiled. "You once told me no one should ever bow to another. So today I offer a crown not for power, but for gratitude." And as she spoke, the massive ship above them lit up like dawn breaking through the storm. The world that had forgotten Evan began to remember him again, because one act of human kindness had crossed the stars and come home. The next morning, the world woke to a sound no one had ever heard before. It began as a deep hum that shook windows and rattled hearts. Birds scattered from the skies, animals froze mid-step, and across the coastline people came running from their homes. Above the city, the clouds began to twist into spirals of gold and blue light. Evan stood in his workshop doorway, staring upward. Lyra stood beside him, calm and silent, her silver eyes glowing faintly. The rain from last night had stopped, but the air was still heavy with the smell of lightning. "What's happening?" he asked softly. Lyra looked at the sky. "They've come for me, and for you." Before he could reply, the clouds split apart like torn fabric, and from the tear a massive fleet descended. Thousands of alien ships glided through the atmosphere, sleek, luminous, silent. Each one bore the same crest that shone faintly on Lyra's armor. People screamed, others fell to their knees. The military scrambled jets into the air, but they stopped almost immediately when the alien fleet didn't attack. The The ships formed a perfect circle over the ocean, their reflections dancing on the water like a field of suns. And then, from the center of that circle, a single golden ship descended, a royal carrier, larger than any city tower. It hovered above the waves, casting light across the entire shore. The air vibrated with energy, and the sound was deep like the heartbeat of the universe itself. Lyra turned to Evan. "You once told me humans fear what they don't understand. I hope they'll see this differently." Evan swallowed hard. "If they don't, I'll still stand beside you." Her eyes softened. "You always did." A platform extended from the royal ship, glowing with energy. Lyra walked toward it, her armor shining like sunlight on metal. The crowd that had gathered on the shore stepped back in awe. Evan followed, unsure if his legs could carry him. When they reached the platform, it lifted smoothly into the air, rising above the beach until they stood face to face with the fleet. A quiet, strange beauty filled the sky. No weapons, no violence, only light. The entire fleet turned its lights toward Lyra. For a moment, it looked as if the heavens themselves were bowing. Evan's chest tightened. He whispered, "They're saluting you." Lyra turned her head slightly. "No, they're saluting us." Her voice echoed across the platform, carried by invisible transmitters that reached every ship. "To my people," she said, her tone calm and powerful, "I bring you to the world where I was once saved. This man," she gestured to Evan, "taught me the meaning of freedom. Without him, there would be no Lyra, no empire reborn, no liberation across the stars." Her words were translated into dozens of alien tongues. Across the fleet, millions listened. The air itself seemed to tremble. Evan shifted uncomfortably. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "I'm just a mechanic," Lyra smiled softly. "Then you are proof that even the smallest hands can move the universe." The platform descended slowly toward the ground again. The people on the beach were no longer running or hiding. They stood silently, staring up at the two figures, an old human man and a radiant alien queen side by side. A little boy near the front whispered, "Is she going to hurt us?" His mother shook her head slowly. "No, child. Look how she bows." As they touched the ground, Lyra turned to Evan and knelt before him. The world gasped. The queen of 1,000 worlds kneeling before a human man. "Lyra, don't—" he began, but she looked up, tears shining in her silver eyes. "You freed me when I was nothing," she said softly. "Now I return to free your world from fear. No more secrets, no more chains. From this day forward, my people and yours will stand as one." Behind her, the fleet's lights shifted color, gold to white, bright enough to wash the shore in warmth. A signal, a vow of peace. Evan could barely breathe. He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Get up, kid," he said gently, the same way he had spoken all those years ago. "You don't bow to anyone, remember?" Lyra laughed quietly through her tears and stood. Together they faced the horizon as the crowd slowly began to cheer. Somewhere far above, the clouds closed again, but the light stayed. The day the sky split open, humanity saw not an invasion but a reunion. And though Evan never asked for it, that day the galaxy gave him a title no one else could earn. To her people, he became the liberator of worlds. The great ship's halls were vast and alive with light. Evan had never seen anything like it. Walls that shimmered like glass but felt warm as skin. Floors that echoed softly with every step. Strange symbols floated in the air, glowing faintly as if the ship itself breathed. Everywhere he looked, alien faces bowed respectfully. Warriors, nobles, and engineers, all lowering their heads when Lyra passed. But it wasn't fear that guided them. It was love. Reverence. Evan followed quietly beside her, his steps heavy, his metal arm creaking with every movement. He still couldn't believe it. The same girl he once pulled from a cage was now the ruler of an empire that spanned stars. Yet she still walked beside him as if nothing had changed. When they entered the central chamber, he stopped to catch his breath. The room opened into a dome of light, and in its center stood a grand seat made of crystal and metal, the throne of her world. Lyra turned to him with a smile. "This is the heart of my fleet," she said. "Every decision, every command begins here." Evan nodded, looking around. "And you're telling me you built all this?" Her eyes softened. "Not alone. I had help, from the ones who believed in what you taught me." He frowned. "What I taught you?" She stepped closer. Do you remember what you told me that night in the mines? You said freedom means nothing unless you share it. That became the first law of my empire. Evan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't even remembered saying it. To him, it was just something to comfort a frightened child. But to her, it had become the foundation of a civilization. Lyra waved her hand gently and a section of the wall turned transparent, showing the galaxy outside. Thousands of ships hung in formation, glowing softly. Each of those worlds was once in chains, she said. We freed them. They call it the Lyrian Accord, but it began with you. Evan shook his head slowly. No, it began with you having the courage to believe. Lyra smiled faintly. Perhaps we both had enough. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful, heavy with memories. Then she motioned for him to follow again. There's something I want to show you. They entered another chamber, smaller, quieter. The air was filled with soft humming. At the center stood a tall monument carved from dark metal. Strange symbols spiraled up its sides, and at its base was something that made Evan freeze. It was his old navigation chip, the same one he had traded to free her so many years ago. He stepped closer, his fingers trembling. You kept this? Lyra nodded. It was the first thing I rebuilt after I escaped. I wanted to remember the price of freedom. Evan laughed softly, shaking his head. That old piece of junk? You made it a monument? Her silver eyes glimmered with warmth. You made it sacred. She looked down for a moment, her voice quieter now. When I was lost, I used to imagine what you would say. When I doubted myself, I remembered how you looked at me, not like a creature or a queen, but like someone worth saving. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder gently. You don't owe me anything, Lyra. You gave that kindness back to the galaxy. That's more than enough. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she smiled. Still, I wanted you to see what you began. The chamber doors opened and 2 attendants entered, carrying a long piece of cloth shimmering with golden light. They knelt before Lyra, speaking softly in their language. She nodded, then turned to Evan. They wish to honor you, she said, but not as a subject, only as a friend. Evan blinked. Honor me? For what? Lyra stepped forward and lifted the cloth. It wasn't armor or metal. It was a robe woven with symbols of both their worlds. She draped it across his shoulders gently, her fingers brushing his metal arm. You once gave me warmth when I had nothing. Now I return it, Evan chuckled, wiping at his eyes. You always did have a dramatic side, Lyra smiled. You taught me that stories are meant to be remembered. Outside the chamber window, the fleets began to move again, spreading their light across the dark. Every ship turned on a single golden beam that converged into the stars above them, a sign used only during royal oaths. Evan looked at the display in awe. What does it mean? Lyra stood beside him, her expression calm and proud. It means the Empire has returned home. And as the galaxy shimmered beyond the glass, Evan realized something he hadn't before. He was no longer looking at a frightened girl. He was looking at the future of 2 worlds joined by 1 act of mercy. He smiled softly. You really did it, kid. You turned kindness into power. Lyra looked up at him, eyes shining. No, she said gently. You did. The grand hall of Lyra's palace stretched farther than Evan could see. Columns of crystal reached toward the stars, and rivers of soft light flowed through the floor, glowing beneath his feet. The air shimmered with music, voices from 100 worlds, singing in languages he couldn't understand but could feel in his chest. It was beautiful and strange, like standing inside a living sunrise. Evan walked slowly beside Lyra. His steps echoed, steady but humble. Soldiers, nobles, and children bowed as they passed. Every eye followed them with respect, not because of fear, but because of what they represented. The Savior and the Queen, the past and the future, walking side by side. When they reached the throne, Lyra turned and faced her people. Her silver armor gleamed beneath the golden light. Behind her, a wall-sized window showed the stars where her fleet floated silently, watching the ceremony. My people, Lyra began, her voice echoing through the hall. You know our story. You know the pain of chains, the silence of captivity, and the fire of hope that set us free. But what you may not know is how that fire began. She turned toward Evan. The light caught his weathered face, the lines of time and battle carved deep. It began, she continued softly, with one man who refused to walk away. A quiet ripple spread through the hall. Evan lowered his head, embarrassed, but Lyra took his hand and led him forward. This human, she said, her voice breaking slightly, saw a child the universe had already thrown away, and instead of turning from her suffering, he gave her something greater than freedom. He gave her a reason to live. The hall was silent except for her words. No one breathed. Even the music seemed to pause. Lyra raised her hand and a servant stepped forward carrying a small crown, simple, elegant, made not of gold but of woven silver and light. She held it gently between her palms. This crown is not of rule, she said. It is of gratitude, a symbol that compassion is stronger than power, and that even the smallest act of mercy can echo across galaxies. She turned toward Evan. Please, kneel. He shook his head with a quiet smile. You know I don't do well with that kind of thing. Her eyes softened. Then let me kneel instead. Gasps filled the room as the Queen of 1,000 Worlds lowered herself before an old human mechanic. Her silver hair brushed the glowing floor. Evan froze, his throat tight, his vision blurring with tears. Lyra, please, don't, he whispered. She looked up at him. You once told me no one should kneel to another. But today I kneel not in servitude, only in thanks. And as she rose again, she placed the crown in his hands. The light from it reflected off the metal of his prosthetic arm, painting his face in gold. Evan smiled faintly. You've come a long way, kid. Lyra's voice trembled as she answered. Because you believed I could. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. The sound filled the palace, the ships, the sky. Across entire systems, the moment was broadcast. An image of an alien queen and a human standing together, united by kindness, not conquest. Later that night, the hall was quiet again. The guests were gone. Evan sat alone on the balcony, looking at the stars that had once felt so cold. Lyra joined him, holding 2 cups of glowing drink. She handed one to him and smiled. You used to talk about Earth, she said. The sea, the wind, the smell of home. Do you miss it? He chuckled softly. Sometimes, but I think home isn't a place. It's people. And somehow I found mine among the stars. Lyra looked out at the galaxy below her fleet. There are still worlds in chains, she said. Still those who suffer. Evan nodded slowly. Then you know what to do. She turned to him. Will you stay? Help me rebuild them? He looked at her for a long time. The years in his eyes were heavy, but his heart was light. You don't need me for that anymore. You've already become everything you were meant to be. Lyra lowered her head, tears glimmering like diamonds. Then promise me one thing, she whispered. He smiled softly. Anything. Promise me you'll never forget who you are, she said. The man who saved a lost child and gave her the stars. Evan reached out and touched her shoulder gently. And you promise me, he said, that no matter how high you rise, you'll stay human where it matters. She smiled through her tears. Always. They sat together in silence as the first rays of a distant sun lit the fleet. The golden light poured over them, warm and soft. Evan leaned back and closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt peace. The world no longer needed saving. The girl he once freed now ruled with mercy. Lyra turned to him, whispering softly to herself. He freed me once from chains, and now he frees me from fear. Above them, the stars burned brighter than ever. The galaxy would tell their story for centuries. The story of a human who gave everything for kindness, and the alien queen who returned to crown him, not in power, but in love and remembrance. It wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a legend, the legend of the human who freed the stars.